Hello, my name is Dr. Scott Young, and today we're going to talk to you about NESARA, the Federal Reserve, and debt. Coming right up. Okay, so if you've watched the first one of the series, you already know a little bit about the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a private organization. The British Crown has always been trying to get into our back pocket, and they did it through the central bank idea, because they're all hooked in together. Did you know that the Queen can't even get back into the Buckingham Palace anymore? Oh, they say because she's old. Wait a second, why couldn't she get in last year? She get in last year, but she couldn't get in this year. In 1913, it was started by Woodrow Wilson, and I'm gonna just go over this real briefly. And that corruption started to occur in World War I. In 1929, America was defrauded by getting people out of their money, so they took away through the Great Depression, through the stock market crash, and they took away the assets and bought it. See, you always want to sell high and buy low. Well, guess what the American people did? They had to sell low when they bought high, so they lost their money. But the central bankers actually set it up that way. The gold standard was lost under FDR, where he defrauded people from, and it's not just him, but it was the central bankers that were requiring it. It's taking the debts back. So he paid out to people when he got the gold in, $20.60 an ounce. But suddenly, in a year later, it's worth 33 bucks an ounce. That means they increased the value, okay? Deflated what it's actually worth. So we actually increase the value of the money. So our fiat currency is backed in this nothingness of what the Federal Reserve actually says. The IRS is the arm of that corruption. So it takes in the money, pays it of our debts, right? I mean, they pay in and they put the burden on the backs of us, not themselves. They aren't even taking the debts off. So the IRS takes your money, gives it to the Treasury just for the heck of it, just to filter out so there's a little bit of money taken off, because the Treasury has to take your money, right? The Federal Reserve gets the money, pays back the debt, but before they pay back the debt, so let's just say they get a number, okay? They get $600 billion, and that's a kind of a number that comes in. They get $600 billion, so all the Treasury, the Federal Reserve people, they get to take 6% off the money just for themselves. Then they build the cash, no big deal. They make you pay for that. They're not going to pay for any costs. And shove it right back to you, devalued in that year. This is taxation without representation. This is exactly what the Constitution, exactly what the Revolutionary War was created to throw off the bonds of that slavery and the taxation without representation. Let's talk a little bit about the Fed, or the debt, and the personal and governmental kind of debt. Personal debt is like mortgage, student loans, cars, credit cards. They're all in a compounding interest. See, if you just took out a calculator and you said a 5-year note at 5% for $10,000, you'd come out with a calculation. I don't know what that is off the top of my head, okay? And you'd come out with a calculation, but you have to have special calculations, okay? And I actually have one on my iPad, and you can kind of look at this if you want to know about this, called Loan Mentor, okay? So if you have a calculation, what you're going to find is all the interest payment comes up in the front half of that loan. All these loans are doing this, okay? Student loans, credit card loans, car loans, house loans are all taking the interest up in the front. So on the back end, when you get to the back end of the payment, you're finally putting mostly principal only in the last about year. So they've already made a huge amount of it. So let me give you an example of a loan. Let's say a $7,800 loan, a 4-year time frame, 13%. Just making up a number, okay? Just stick with me. It's a monthly payment of $211. The interest on that thing is $2,200 in 4 years versus a $7,800 principal. And that money comes up in the front end. And that happens on every single one of these loans. This is the compounding interest that through Donald Trump, he's going to kill through the bankers. See, people hear this all the time. Young students say, take away the student loans. I'm telling you that governmental student loans are going to die. I want to share with you my own personal debt story. I didn't have any personal debt, but I started up a business in 2006 and I was dumb about it. I'm just telling you what happened. I was dumb. I built up debts and put it in. I wasn't really watching it in the same way. I should have been more careful with that. By 2009, I had to delete my business partner because he was in his personal bankruptcy and in foreclosure, and he couldn't sign the new loan. He couldn't do it. I was at $452,000 of debt. I went back the other day because I was asked about this new PPP loan that came out in March, and I had to come up with some information for the huge amount of information I'm filling out, right? I was going back in 2009 looking at what I paid. Now, there was a credit card for the business that had $50,000 of money on it. And it was totally maxed out for this Chase credit card. It's part of the credit cabal. I was putting $1,500 a month on that credit card, but $1,200 was coming out for just interest. It's what happens to the world. We have people when they get the average person has $6,000 of credit card debt. That's a huge amount of debt that they can barely come up with. They might be putting, like I just said, a couple $100 a month on it, but they're always underneath. They can never really kill off the interest. It crushes you because of the lack of information that we have. Personal debt education doesn't happen. We have people like Dave Ramsey, who's going to be really powerful, and a whole bunch of others that we need to be listening to because we're going to find out what this debt economy really is about. There's a usury of the debt by these big banks, not the small banks, okay? Small banks are doing some of it, but they're only inside of the system. When they're unhinged from the big banks who are going to go down, and they're not going to take you down, by the way. We're going to explain that in a second. You're not going to go down. They're going down, and they're going to go down with their own stuff because Trump is going to just translate that stuff over. But the usury that comes out is just weighing you down. And so you're working 2 jobs and 3 jobs, and you're still underneath, and you don't have time for your kids. And then one of the biggest disruptions in families is, when a husband and wife are married, is that financial clash. And then they just decide to get divorced, and for many reasons, but one of it's financial. So they're trying to release themselves from the debt issues, and then they get in more debt because they get into another marriage. Both of them get married again, and then they get divorced, and then they have debt upon debt upon debt, and then they get bankruptcy. 7 years later, they go back right into the same thing. This is just this cycle of this weighing loans. I mean, these loans for student loans can be $115,000. That's nearly a house payment in other smaller communities with that. There's also large corporate debt, okay? This helps businesses to take risks. I've taken out many different loans for corporate loans, okay? So companies will come in and they want to do something, they get a loan for millions of dollars or thousands of dollars, whatever that might be. When companies get too big to fail, by the way, that is a great movie you ought to watch. The Federal Reserve take those debts on as a backstop to insolvency. So they basically, we never get that. They can go right back out and get more debt. See, if you do bankruptcy, you can't get any more debt to get yourself, back into that. Just even for little things, you don't have any ability to get debt. But the big companies that are too big to fail, we give them billions of dollars, take their sort of bad debts that they've developed by horrible business practices and throw them on the Federal Reserve their balance sheets. So what's coming off of them, they can do more debts out there. And those guys, their credit ratio never goes down. So that's the cruddy part of that whole system. How much debt is too much debt? So for a business, 30 to 50% of the debt to income ratio is the possible ability for Chapter 11, which is reorganization, Chapter 13, which is an adjustment of the debt, meaning like, you're putting it all together and coming up with a payment that might be helpful. And then Chapter 7, which is complete liquidation. It wipes it out. But guess what it doesn't wipe out? Student loans and IRS debts. Wait a second. That's the two ones from the government right inside the Federal Reserve. Personal debt is 30 to 50%. Again, they have Chapter 7, which is discharging some of the debts, or most of the debts, except for those two I just mentioned. Chapter 13, which is a repayment of the debt. It's similar to the business plan. So that is ability to be able to kind of release you from that possibility. But it puts you on the government rolls. It kind of locks you into the system. Again, we have it says five here, but you gotta pick up this. 26.6 trillion of debt. 3.3 trillion of income tax revenue comes in. The interest on that debt is $385 trillion over the time frame, over the lifespan. You see, when you buy a $250,000 house, you're gonna pay at least that, probably 2.5 times. So you're gonna pay at least $300,000 of interest on that 30-year loan, even at 2.75, for instance. You're gonna pay 2.5 times, and then, just to get that amount out. You've way overpaid for that house. These people cannot do this. In 2009, and I give you this example in the last one, but in 2009, Greece had 45% of the people that were in the government payroll. Means that they worked for the government. You can't have almost majority of people on the government payroll. We're not even talking about the people that were disabled and were given money for whatever reason because they're unemployed or they're whatever that situation is. You're talking about, so many people are on the TIT, of the government. And I don't want to get into gross things here, but you got to say that essentially. They're suckling off the government in a heavy, heavy way that they went belly up. So the credit rating goes all the way down. But they're inside, we have those kinds of things and that will mess us up. So the EU, Germany was really upset about it. France was upset about it, even though France was in their own trouble. But Germany at least had some money, really upset about having to shove some of their own money to rescue Greece. So how do you do this? In our next one here, NESARA is the National Economic Stabilization and Recovery Act. The rainbow currency that's coming out. It might be called something different, but don't worry about that. The $100 trillion of gold-backed monies is gonna be available. What they have to do is take away the debts. The debts, we have $80 trillion here. Just to give you a little idea. There's $80 trillion of business personal debt. That's credit cards, that's house payments, that's car payments, all of that stuff. Including the business debts. See, if we keep the business debts out there for those businesses that we need to keep going, and I'm not just talking about the too big to fail banks, but Microsoft or whatever that company you might think of, a Walmart or whatever, you can't lose those companies because then unemployment goes through the roof. So you've got to backstop all of those. So what Trump is going to do, he's going to take all those debts and shove it right on the Federal Reserve, the central bankers who've been stealing billions upon trillions of dollars. And you could kind of go through this, but basically our money is going to revalue in a massive way. The dollar possibly could be 87 bucks per dollar. You're talking about a massive amount of money. You see, in the past, houses were $10,000 and you found a time where you paid off your loan. Go watch a MASH episode with Potter, and his wife mails him the loan payment, and they were burned it up, and they owned their house. They were able to get to that. No one gets to that anymore. In December 17, the executive order, here's the fascinating executive order that Donald Trump accomplished, is he blocked the property of persons involved in serious human rights abuses and corruptions. And it basically says, any kind of international bad stuff that they could do, okay? They don't get their revaluation. See, this revaluation is if you have $1,000 in the bank, you're gonna have $1,000, I don't care what bank you're in, $1,000 of gold-backed money. You're not gonna lose it by going from this because you haven't had crimes against humanity, hopefully, okay? But the ones that have, and guess what? I mean, A.G. Barr actually would say this. There's maybe 50% of the Congress and the Senate who are probably going to go to jail. And I'm not even just talking about the left or the right. I'm not talking about Democrat, Republican. I'm talking about both sides of this. How come these guys are in Congress and Senate for 20 and 30 years and they're worth more when they went in than when they were out? They haven't made anything. They have these great salaries with unbelievable benefits, and they get the salary for the rest of their life, which is ridiculous. If you have a 2-year Congress term, you might make $130,000 a year, and you get the rest of your life. Where do I sign up for that one? But the ones that have been inside of the system, and I can give you long stories about this. You guys can go research this, okay? SEDM, I think it is, .org will give you some great information about this kind of stuff. But the point is that you can look at some of the gross levels of the way the taxation comes out and how it comes to the 1%ers. What does the Bible say about it? Romans 7:15 through 8:2. For I do not understand what I'm doing because I do not practice what I want to do, but I do what I hate. But it's sin living in me. So I discover this principle. When I want to do what is good, evil is with me. But I see a different law, waging war against the law of my mind, taking me prisoner from the law of sin. What a wretched man am I. Who will rescue me from this dying body? Therefore, no condemnation now exists for those who are in Christ Jesus, because the Spirit of the law of life is in Jesus, who has set you free from the law of sin and death. I could spend hours upon this particular conversation. Inside of your flesh, basically this. You want to do good, but you don't know how to have the ability to do it. So that means inside of the Spirit law, this new law and this new part that Trump, a believer in Christ, guys, you don't understand it. You might be thinking about when he was in the 80s and 90s when he wasn't, okay? By the way, we're forgiven. We have grace over his past, just like I have grace over my past. Christ doesn't count the sin against me. Okay? It's as far as the east is from the west. Now, what happens here is we're going to live by a spirit of a different law, of a gold-backed standard, okay? It doesn't mean that everyone's going to be believers here, okay? We're going to pray about that stuff. We need to be praying about that in ministry stuff. What does this mean here? You can't follow, and I'm going to use this as a deeper example. You can't follow the old debt system. You can't. You're going to have to learn about a new type of system, that money has a higher value. We're going to have a different level of education. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to have to teach you about money. There's going to be a new principle at work. Instead of the fiat, we're going to go to a gold standard. There's not going to be education. I mean, there's not going to be an income tax kind of point. We're going to have a taxation based upon consumption. This is a constitutional point. NESARA comes out of the 14th Amendment in the 4th section, where these farmers realized the gross inadequacies that were coming from the government, and they found a way to get this signed into law. But no one wanted to sign it in. Not Bush Sr., not Bush Jr., not Clinton, who was almost forced by gunpoint to do this, not Obama, who fought against us. All of these are inside of the cabal. They've not wanted anything to do with this stuff. But it's coming because Trump was actually talked to by the people who have the cash. They have plenty of cash to be able to do this. They can wipe out all the debts. Do you want to have monies for healthcare? We're going to find a way to do it. Do you want to go to college for free? You can't. I mean, there are ways to do this. Now, it does mean that you have to be a productive member of society. I'm not talking about people. I know of a person right off the top of my head. Her name is Linda. Linda has a severe to profound hearing loss. She's almost deaf in this ear. She is deaf in this ear and has very little hearing. She wears hearing aids in both ears. Very difficult hearing loss. She is overweight. Not her fault, but she's very depressed. She's on many medications. She has bad knee, bad back, so many different things that are going on top of her depression. And I remember talking to her many times, you should be on disability. I could have helped her sign up for 100% disability. I talked to her many times. She wanted to work. And that's the great part of her. She was a very depressed person and kind of caustic on that nature too. But that person should have the opportunity to be in disability, okay? We need to take care of that. We also need to take care, and inside of NESARA is an opportunity for the people who are disabled and the people who are our senior citizens who are living on subsistence levels. There's ways and means to be able to do that. And inside of a reduced government, this is ridiculous. Do you know that, when the government buys a hammer, when you buy a hammer, it's $3, right? The government buys a hammer, it's $1,000. It's ridiculous because they put on all these lobbyists and they have to have specifications and do all this stuff and the testing and everything else. Come on. We got to get rid of all these points of regulations that come up in here. And when you kill the regulations, and by the way, Trump kills off 25 pages for every one regulation that comes in. And I might be exactly wrong on the exact number, but he kills off so many more, many times over the number of regulations, because those are what hamper the people. I'm not talking about good regulations. I'm talking about ridiculous regulations. And what those regulations do is the people get their take of the dollar. The old system, bringing the corruption and the socialism, you got to see out of the shadows. You want to see some really heavy corruption? Those people are going to prison. Those people are going to Gitmo, and they are the wicked. Boy, Revelation 14 says, let the wicked be wicked. I'm not talking about someone who wants to come back, but they have gone so far in their wickedness. They have killed babies. Man, I swear to you, if I saw that, you'd see me unchained, okay? If I saw that in front of you, and by the way, most people in the world, if they saw that, they would tear them limb from limb. But here's what's going to happen. There's going to be a local taxation. There's local taxation, sales tax. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? So you have the local taxation. Probably have a little lower taxation because you have lesser government. You don't need all this government stuff, okay? And then what happens, there's going to be a national sales tax and probably a 14%. Now, it's not going to tax on groceries and schools, governments, drugs, medical supplies, any of that stuff. Like, do you know that in state of Oklahoma, hearing aids are put on sales tax? See, that's an unrighteous tax because they earmark things and throw it in, then they move the monies around to some other thing. And I'm like, you want to give that ability there, you need to take it out of this fund. So it'll be consumer items. So when you have no income tax, if you're making $50,000, instead of getting only $30,000 or less, it could be like $28,000 that you're living on $28,000. You're living on whatever they give you. And what happens there is this. You're living on that. Then you have to pay sales tax, and it keeps chopping away at the monies that you can make. But if you don't have any more income tax, it's not for you just necessarily to get rich. And by the way, God doesn't care if you're rich. God doesn't care about that. That's not the focus. And what happens, there will be more of a focus upon the consumption tax. Now, I'm willing to pay consumption tax all the way through because when I buy, that's a good thing for the economy. When I buy something, it feeds into the economy. And that should be taxed so that the government can run those things like police officers, like fire, like rescue, and those very needed things that we need to have in military. I am so good for those people in those public service roles, the real strong public service roles. We need to do that. But we need to have an economy that runs in that way. And once you start taking away this base corruption, this cruddy stuff, I'd love to see two people of a different persuasion talk about education and argue it out in Congress without the corruption in there. And I'd be like, you know what? I might not agree with everything that one side or the other might say, but what they're doing is they're doing it in righteousness. They're doing it in just honest conversations. Then we can address health care. We can address, all these different things of colleges and all these different areas of our governments. How we should handle police and what we should do and what we should teach them about, what we should do with all of these areas. Are they issues? Yes, they're all issues. How we handle from a governmental standpoint, how we interact with the nations, how we shouldn't have, this is a nationalist kind of viewpoint, how we shouldn't have these nations coming in and telling us what to do. And by the way, what the U.S. shouldn't be telling these other nations what to do. They should make their own choice there. They're going to make different choices. As long as they're not hurting us, that's okay. And that's what NESARA is. Now, there's another edge to this, and I'll leave you with this point. GESARA is the global portion of this. Now, Trump has had to work with this situation with these countries. There's 208 countries that have already signed up to the GESARA thing. And in August of 2020, we have had maybe a dozen different explosions and fires. Do you know what those are about? I'm going to give you inside information here. Those portions are about the unrighteousness that those places have done. Part of them are CIA black sites that they would have had a counter-revolution against the people. In Lebanon, one of the most amazing ones, it looks nearly nuclear. It's a 2/5, I think it's 2/5 of a nuclear explosion, the way it happens. There were gross things happening in the underground tunnels. And this is some of the child trafficking. And the Lebanese people rose up and said, "You're done." And they had nooses out there with what they would do. And the government came out and said, "We resign." That's a point of NESARA, GESARA, if I've ever seen it. That's the powerful things that are happening. And we're going to talk a lot more about this in some of this area, but read the Word of God. The Word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword, separating between bone and marrow, spirit and soul, able to identify the thoughts, intents of the heart. That's Hebrews 4:12. Guys, we need to see this. We need to have wisdom, and it's coming. But you have an active role in this. So I thank you for listening. Subscribe to the channel, ask some questions, happy to answer them. Thank you.